If you're thinking about getting a property coach, you might be wondering, am I going to get really good advice or am I just going to get a biased sales pitch? Hi, Andrew Nicol here from Opes Partners, where we help you become successful property investors right here in New Zealand. In this video, I'm going to break down how we figure out if your property coach will give you genuine advice or if they're just going to sell you a property. So what are property coaches and what do they do? Well, some investors are DIYers and they like to figure it out themselves. But if that's not for you, then a property coach might be more appropriate. Property coaches will either teach you how to find a property or find a property for you to invest in. Now, these businesses call themselves all different things like coaches, mentors, or property partners. Now, are they all the same? Well, not really. They fall into three main categories. Now, the first category will teach you how to find the property yourself, and you pay a fee for the service, normally between $8,000 and $25,000. They might provide an ongoing mentoring service, and examples of these companies are Property Apprentice, Renovations, or Wealth Mentors. Now, the next one is less of a property coach per se, but they'll help you find a property based on the criteria that you've already set yourself. Now, there's normally a fee for the service, and it might be about $11,500. And a good example of this is I Find Property. Now, the last on my list is a property coach that will go out and find a property for you to invest in based on the research that they've done. Now, generally speaking, they won't charge a fee for this service, rather they'll charge a fee to the property's current owner if you wish to invest through them. This is a done-for-you type of service, and here at Opes Partners, we fall into this category. This model would suit an investor who wants to take a very hands-off passive approach, which is why we tend to recommend new properties which are bought directly from a developer. Why might a property coach be biased? For property coaches that fall into the third category, you might think, how can I trust your advice if you've got a financial interest in recommending me a property? Which is a great question and one worth answering. So let's unpack it step by step, first considering what the financial incentives for property coaches look like. Well, it can make you worry that an unscrupulous property coach will just sell a property to any investor, knowing that it's not a good investment. After all, that's their financial incentive. So let's apply this to a different industry, like accountants or lawyers who bill by the hour. Now, these professionals are incentivized to sell you additional billable hours that you might not actually need. But on the whole, do we actually see this happening? No, we don't. Now, the reason it doesn't work like this is because if you had this mentality, then these kind of businesses would fizzle out very, very quickly because of poor reputation. A good property coach isn't thinking about the here and now. They're willing to invest the time in you and understand and wait for the right property to come along to match your needs and build a trusted brand, because that will lead to success in the long term. For instance, here at Opes Partners, before we even show properties to an investor, we'll determine whether or not our strategy is right for you. And the way we do that is working through this checklist in our workbook to make sure it is the right fit. And if it's not, that's okay. We'll tell you. So how do I tell if I've got a good property coach or not? Well, firstly, ask your coach who their service is not the right fit for. And if they can't give you a clear answer, then how do you know if it fits you or not? Secondly, I'd look to see if their process and how they deliver their service and advice is actually articulated online. Someone giving genuine advice has a structure and a process for providing it. So you might be thinking, can you actually be unbiased if you're recommending a property? And the answer is that it depends. It depends on how the property coach determines which property to recommend. Will they recommend any property if someone pays them to, or will they only recommend something that they think's a good investment? Now, here's an example of a property coach who's going out on social media just asking for anything. Now, that's not an example of a good property coach. On the other hand, some property coaches will look for specific properties in chosen areas because they believe it will generate the best return. Now, we've previously recommended Rolleston. Now, we didn't do this because there were properties there to sell. Instead, we went to find properties in that area because we believed it would make a great investment. Another example is the Tauranga Market. Between 2014 and 2017, we recommended several developments to investors within the Bay of Plenty area. Now, we don't do that right now, not because there aren't properties being built there or because we couldn't get them on our books, but because prices are so high and our reading of the data doesn't support the continued growth in the short term. So what are some things you can ask your property coach to determine if you've got a good one? So firstly, ask the property coach what their criteria is when selecting investment properties to recommend. A good property coach will be able to outline exactly what they're looking for in detail. Do they look for 4-bedroom standalone houses in Rolleston? Or perhaps they look for 2-bedroom townhouses in Hamilton? You'll need to judge for yourself the quality of the property recommendation, but the more specific the property coach is, the better. The next thing to figure out is why they're recommending a specific property. Can they give you a compelling, data-driven reason for the property that they've recommended as an investment? Is it because it's new and looks nice? Or is it because the suburb grew in value 6.5% per year for the last 20 years? Is their answer based on fact or feeling? You can't fake facts. And finally, ask the property coach who in their team finds the properties to recommend and how they do it. It's a better sign if they can outline how they actively look for stock. You don't want to work with a property coach who's just trying to sell anything that comes to them. And the last thing I want to cover, can property coaches mitigate any potential bias? Now, I can't speak to every property investment firm in the country, but I can speak about what we do here at Opes Partners. So we actively address concerns about potential bias by talking about it openly through videos like this, participating in Facebook groups, and through the Property Academy podcast. Secondly, we charge a flat fee to developers, so we're not incentivized to recommend something just because it's expensive to earn a higher fee. We're incentivized to do what's right for the investor. As I mentioned earlier, before we build a property plan with an investor, we confirm that the strategy we coach, a passive approach based on new builds, is right for them. We're also about to launch a service where investors are coached on renovations. By coaching multiple strategies, that means there's no incentive for us to get a client to use a particular way of investing if it's not right for them. Finally, we run a sizable business. We've been around for 8 years and have built a substantial base of investors who choose to work with us. We don't want to convince someone to use a strategy or buy an investment property that's not right for them. So, are property coaches biased? In every industry, there'll be good and bad companies, and there's no list online of biased and unbiased property coaches or financial advisors, so you'll need to do the research and make the decision for yourself. You may even decide that a property coach isn't the right fit for you, and that's okay. Although if you decide you want to be an investor with a passive investment strategy, finding an unbiased property coach may be the right next step for you. Now, even after everything we've spoken about today, there will still be people in the industry that think property coaches are biased. So I want to tell you a personal story. Now, I was working with a lovely couple in Christchurch who were doing due diligence on a couple of properties that another property investment firm had recommended for investment for them. Now, when I looked through them, one of the properties I thought they could do better, but the other was excellent, and I told them that. Now, whilst my financial incentive would have been to tell those people to cancel both contracts and buy something that I would recommend, I didn't do that because the right thing for those investors was to buy one of those properties that had been recommended, and that's exactly what I told them to do.